Hey, how's it going? My name is Kenyette Tisha Barnes once again, and I am here to wrap us up on WTF is Project 2025. So as we're winding down, I want to take a moment and talk about the Department of Education. Because, yeah. So first of all, as we stated before, the author of the Department of Education is an extremely conservative educational scholar, okay? And we're not going to go deep into her receipts, but we need to get real about what this mandate says in terms of the Department of Education. So we're just going to take this beat by beat, and we're going to start with K through 12. So K through 12. There was some evidence and some information and some statistics that were literally just put up as red herrings to really make the case to dismantle public education. So one of the things that we know is that in minority schools, especially public schools, math and reading scores tend to trend lower than in other schools, primarily because schools are dependent upon your zip code and your tax, health of your community. We can thank Plessy versus Ferguson for that. Although separate but equal never really took off, it took off in a very clandestine, very insidious way. Education in the United States is highly based on zip code. And because it's highly based on zip code, and we have a great deal of racial segregation in our living patterns. Redlining, anyone? Talk about redlining. We do see disparities on academic achievement based on schools and school districts. Okay, hi. So I actually brought Sasha's friend in today. And so let's talk more about this, okay? Because I think it's important. When we get into this whole red herring around gender identity in collegiate sports, again, this is more ideology than anything else. Because what also happens in the conversation is that we have to protect girls from the transgender boogeymen who are coming into locker rooms. Yet, when we do experience gender violence, there has to be due process to ensure that our young men are not just being thrown to the wolves, right? Yeah. That just happened. All right, so now let's just get down to the nitty-gritty, right? Okay, so one of the things that is really clear is this idea of meritocracy as admission criteria as opposed to affirmative action, which was, just gutted by the Supreme Court, and other non-merit-based selection criteria. And according to the Heritage Foundation, it states the Department of Education relies on graduation rates and average earnings as proxies of educational quality. Both of those outcomes, however, are highly dependent upon a student's socioeconomic background, sex, family status, and other factors. I want you all to remain clear. Race is strategically left out of this conversation. Colleges and universities with selective admission policies post the strongest outcomes and the history of racist admissions. Primarily because they admit mostly low-risk traditional students. So now let's talk about what traditional students means. because traditional students are usually kids who lived in good neighborhoods, attended high-performing schools, attended private schools, have legacy admissions, and are non-minority. So according to the Heritage Foundation, college is just for rich white kids. What y'all think about that? So the one thing about this Department of Education is we're going to be all over the place, because literally I think they took like 12 dissertations and a Fox News article and threw everything in here. So the one thing that they did talk about is school lunch. So I find that really interesting that they even care about school lunch, because you know, there is no overwhelming push to feed children. However, they want to feed children in need, and they don't want to push radical ideology to do it. So let me just read this. The Department of Agriculture tried to advance a radical political agenda. And once again, I want to be clear about language here, okay? About the school lunch program, all right? But what happens in the school lunch program is that children can identify as non-binary, transgender, and they also collect data based on race. And they don't like that, and they think that that's radical, right? They think it's radical to allocate money to schools based on their Title I or their free and reduced lunch proportion, because they believe that it's giving money to low-performing minority schools, and by doing that, you are supporting these values that the Heritage Foundation, the conservative mandate, is vehemently opposed to. For instance, the USDA is threatening to withhold federal taxpayer spending for those meals from schools that do not implement the Title IX of the educational amendments, so that the term sex is replaced with sexual orientation and gender identity. What? So the big problem is that we're actually allowing and expanding classifications of sexual identity and sexual orientation. Yeah, that's the problem. Okay. Yeah, that's the problem. So we're not concerned about kids eating. We're concerned about schools receiving federal funds to feed children, because the forms have sexual orientation and sexual identity as opposed to biological sex. Okay. All right, so now we're going to close up with this one for the Department of Education, and that is phase out existing income-driven payment plans. Yes, that is y'all. So if you're on an income-driven payment plan for your student loans, the Heritage Foundation says, nah, no more. We want you to pay more of your money. We want you to be broke. We want to punish you for daring to go to college and use that education to challenge these conservative ideas that if you just played your role, you'll be fine. This is the most draconian, silly ass shit I've ever seen. Sorry guys. It's silly. Because what you're basically saying is people should not have any kind of income forgiveness. They cannot. No one is saying dismiss it. They're saying make the payments workable. But according to the Heritage Foundation, you guys are taking vacations and buying up properties and staging protests when you should be slaving behind a stove to pay 80% of your income on student loans. Yeah. The Secretary should phase out all existing IDR plans by making new loans ineligible and should implement wages to account for regional differences. Yeah. Basically, if you're living in cities like Miami or San Francisco, New York, Boston, Chicago, move. Just move. And then you can pay more of your money on student loans. So the problem is you all want to live in these fancy cities, and then you want to cry about not being able to pay back your student loans. Wow. So let's do a quick recap of the Department of Education. Number one, the Heritage Foundation wants to completely gut it. So we want to completely get rid of it as it is today. We want the undersecretaries to go to other agencies if they align with the agency and the administration's values. We also are moving the Department of Civil Rights, the Office of Civil Rights, to the Department of Justice, which has literally become a judicial elephant graveyard. Furthermore, we are attempting to gut public education, and we want to incentivize charter schools to come in and take the money. We want the dollars to follow the student, and we also understand that the average cost of private school is about $30,000 a year. So what's going to happen? So you're going to create a second tier non-public option. And unfortunately, we have a lot of evidence on what happens with second tier non-public option education. Then we want to get rid of all gender identity other than male and female based on your biological sex. We don't want pronouns. We want parents to have total rights over their children's education, except if parents actually align with progressive values. Then in that case, the parents need to be, the children need to be protected from their parents. As we move on down the school, we want to make sure that IEDA does not capture things such as race, because what happens is that when you have high numbers of kids who are Black and they're overrepresented in special education or overrepresented in discipline, well, it makes the school look bad. And, it becomes a disproportionality issue. We don't want disproportionality issues. We just want kids to just be, if a tree falls in the woods and no one hears it, did it fall type of a situation. We also have some issues around reporting of data, but that's a whole other video for that. After we get through the special education part of it, we also are tapping into the Title IX, the actual, student and collegiate athletics, because apparently there are rows of transgender athletes who are running into locker rooms and assaulting girls. And we want to protect our girls against that, yet also simultaneously demanding due process when gender violence does occur, but the perpetrators are cis male. We also want to make sure that when kids do graduate high school, that they're not just clogging up universities, because what happens is you should really reserve universities for traditional students. That means students who come from good schools and, with good parents and legacy admissions. Those are the ones who have the best outcomes. Yes, because it's literally easier when you don't have any social adversity against you. So college should be reserved for those students, and the other students, well, we'll figure it out, when we get to it. The other thing too is that if you got any of those income driven repayments on your student loans, well, that's gone. That is absolutely gone. How dare you take money that could have been used for something else and drop out of school or not finish your education or whatever and then only pay pennies on it. That's what they say. That's not what's really happening, but okay, go with me. And finally, we want to make sure that the Department of Education is completely gutted, completely restructured, and only upholds conservative values and parents who align with conservative values. What could possibly go wrong?